Today's interview is with Dr. Tony Gould AM, who is widely regarded as one of Australia's most distinguished jazz musicians and educators. With a career spanning more than 55 decades, he's received many awards for his contributions to music as a composer, performer, recording artist, musician and teacher. So welcome, Tony.
Thanks very much. Pleasure to be here.
Good. Now, could we start off by asking you a little bit about your early family history, and was there any musical talent in the family?
There was kind of, it's an unusual musical family. The dad played on the black notes of the piano and mum played on the white notes, believe it or not. My sister played sometimes on the black and sometimes on the white. So I chose dad's path for a few years. So I played on the black notes, mainly because there's less of them. They stick up so you can see what you're doing, you know. So that's, there was no music education in my household, but for some reason we all seem to be able to muck about and play a few tunes here, Irish jigs and stuff like that.
Yes, yeah. So, did your parents play any musical instruments apart from the black and white notes?
No, just the piano, a little old wooden upright piano in Albert Park somewhere, and I think the only other musical person that turned up at our place was an Irish bloke called Mick Dalton, who played the wooden flute. He came every Friday night, had a few beers with Dad and played some Irish folk songs,
right,
which I still remember. Sort of.
Right, okay. So, how did you get first interested in music and jazz?
Gee, it goes back a long way, mate.
Yes, it is.
Well, we moved around a lot for some reason. I'm still unable to find out. We moved a lot of houses around houses in Middle Park and Albert Park, that part of the world. And I remember living next to a mate who brought me the first time I think I ever heard sort of some sort of jazz was the 1948 Benny Goodman Carnegie Hall Jazz Concerts. Yep. I think it's 1948, wasn't it?
Yep. And
that sort of blew me away. I'd never heard anything like it in my life. Gene Krupa and all those boys playing. And so I got interested in that jazz. I had no training at all until then, until well after then in actual fact. So I learned music by ear, basically, not by theory or harmony. I didn't have any teachers until about 21 or 2. Had a couple
21,
of jazz
22,
lessons.
yeah.
A couple of jazz lessons, but and then I went to university and did a classical music degree. So I thought I was a snob then, so I gave jazz away for a while.
Yes.
Well,
I remember reading your little anecdote that you wrote about big noting with your Beethoven book on the tram.
He's exactly right.
Yeah.
I thought I was really smart, you know,
yes.
playing Beethoven.
Yeah. So, were you playing jazz and that before you in your classical training?
Yes, I was only playing one key. That's a key of G flat with all the black notes. But I was doing gigs when I didn't have trumpet players and saxophones. Didn't have a heart attack me playing in this strange key that I've never played on. I did gigs. Yeah, I played for a few years at the famous then Hampton Hotel, where all the floor shows. Well, I couldn't read music, so I don't know how I got away with it, because I had floor shows every night. And they just put the music up in front of me and I just sort of make it up. I had no idea what the hell I was doing.
Did they ever realise that you...
I eventually came unstuck with an opera singer, turned up one night with a couple of Verdi arias, and I gave my usual G7th arpeggio. That's all I knew. And that fell in a heap, so I thought I better find out where middle C is if I'm going to keep doing this.
Oh, that's terrific. So, who were the first jazz musicians that you got contact with when all this was happening?
There was a pianist called who gave me a couple of lessons called Les Patching.
Yes, he used to play on Channel 9, I think, didn't he?
He did, and he played in various other places. And he played at the Southern Cross Hotel.
Yes.
And I was quite young and seriously didn't know what I was doing musically, but he thought, I'll get him to fill in when I'm not well. So I got to play with Len Bernard in those years, who was one of my favourite musicians
Yes.
on earth.
Yes.
And a bass player called Ivan Verdecki. I don't know whether that rings a bell, but it was in the dining room of the Southern Cross Hotel. So I thought I was starting to become a snob again.
Yes.
And I used to fill in for him there, still not knowing what I was doing, but they seemed to think it was all right. So that's how I really got started in the profession, just by filling in for Les.
Right. And so did Len give you a bit of guidance, because he played piano as well as drums, didn't he?
He did. His guidance was sort of more generally humanistic than anything musical. He's just such a wonderful man, and so was Bob too.
Yes.
Len was. We became very, very special friends. We did a lot of playing after that, on and off. But I don't. I've never been able to play Dixieland jazz very well. So he was sort of crossover too, Len, in those days. He played that famous. What's the famous LP he made? The Naked Dance, I think it's called.
Yeah.
One of the great jazz albums of all time.
Yes.
I didn't get into that world. I played in a sort of more contemporary, modern way, and Len was able to do that too. And it was in the Southern Cross Hotel. It was a sort of quiet, modern jazz type stuff.
Yes, that's right.
Standards.
Although you did have a few lurches into traditional there. I noticed in our database that you actually played on the Datsun Dixielanders.
Your research is outstanding. I tell you, I've forgotten about that. That's true. I can't even remember who was in the band.
No.
It wasn't a bad album, was it?
It wasn't a bad album. I can't remember off the top of my head and there with it, but I came across and I thought, so this is one of the things that I was thinking about you, because your musical experience is quite different to a lot of the trad musicians that we've had, in as much that you've straddled all your life this classical and also creative jazz music as well.
That's true. Classical, after I did a first degree in classical music, I think my whole musical attitude changed, and so you'll hear a lot of sort of Bach and Scarlatti and things that I played after that time. It was a major influence on my life.
Yes.
I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. At the conservatorium with all the posh English accents.
Yes.
It's great.
Yeah. Yes.
Not much jazz there. They didn't like jazz at all.
No, that's right. It was sort of very much in that path.
Very conservative,
So basically, when you started getting into creative music, you had there was, when I looked at your the people you played with, you were always tending towards what we would call more modern jazz. You had Keith Hounslow and Brian Brown, Alan Leake, with all those. So
hard to tell where your taste come from, isn't it? I just veered towards that. So, and I didn't know anything about music, so it's hard to tell where you develop your aesthetic, isn't it?
That's right. You're an amalgam of all sorts of influences that have happened in your life in various ways.
Yeah.
So, if you were looking about musicians that have been a major influence on your life, you talked about Len.
Yep.
And his sheer humanity.
Yep.
What about other musicians that really affected your musical creative abilities?
Local ones would be obviously Len. Keith and I played duo make-it-up music for years. We did a tour of India and Singapore and all those parts of Asia. And and Keith, like me, didn't know what he was doing either. So he was just one of those, what you call naturals. You can hit a brick wall when you're a natural anyway. You have to learn something eventually. But he never even knew what the trumpet was transposed to a B flat. He had no idea. But he put the thing up in his mouth and he could play it.
Yes.
Oh. So I did the same. So we had a great time. No printed music anywhere though, I must say. We used to play standards that we knew and a few things like that. He was pretty amazing, Keith, for somebody that had absolutely no musical training.
Yes, but that was very much the style of a lot of the Australian jazz musicians that sort of grew up learning their music by listening to records and things.
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely right, and that's how it got started.
Yeah,
in
that's right.
Australia.
Exactly. They had so you know, I'm comparing that, and we'll talk about it later about the modern generation going through.
Yep.
The improvisation courses that are multi-instrumental and all the rest of it. It's a completely different world, isn't it?
Absolutely, completely different world.
And what about overseas musicians that have influenced you?
The one several that stick in my mind that I've played for, probably certainly the most incredible musician I've ever played with from the Black American world is Clark Terry.
Clark Terry, yes.
I did a tour with him and played it somewhere out here for 4
Well,
or
I
5
can
days.
tell you where you played. The epic one was the 29th Jazz Convention, 1974 at Dorset Gardens.
That's probably right.
So tell us about why he was such an influential musician.
I think he had before he arrived here, he had a long history of associating with bass here in Ellington. And in Miles Davis's biographies, it always acknowledges Clark as teaching him, inverted commas, about time, the feel of music. And I've never played with anybody that has a better sense of time, rhythmic time, than Clark. So I think Miles was, in good company. And he was a terrific man. I was still sort of amateur then. I don't know how I got away with it, to be honest with you, but it was a trio, and he'd play tempos that I'd never even heard of. It was like going 4 in the bar.
Yeah.
And so you either sink or swim. So I sort of
half
kept my head above water, and that was an amazing experience. The other one was, I think, one of the singers that belongs in the sort of Sarah Vaughan category is Ernestine Anderson, who I played a series of concerts down at the Prince of Wales, I think, who was a phenomenal Black American singer. And I got that job for sheer luck because he sacked the bloke they hired first because he was asking too many questions about, is this a sharp 11 or... She said, I don't care about that, just play the piano. So she had him sacked and I came along and with my sort of amateurish type effort, and we got along fantastically. She had, and Mark Murphy's the other one that's pretty amazing. Hard man in many ways, but fantastic. Well, whose music had been doctored, so to speak, by every great jazz musician in America. So which just looked like a bit of sort of rat-eaten manuscript, which I had to sort of try and follow. But we became good friends, and so there's Bobby Shue was another one. And but I can still remember doing first half of a concert when it happened in Australia. That I don't think it happens much these days. With when Sarah Vaughan was here with a trio, and it was, I still remember that it was Festival Hall, and I was playing with the Alan Lee Quartet. I can still remember, believe it or not, standing in the wings when Sarah walked past me to sing. She had, I think, John Gianelli playing piano and Jimmy Cobb playing the drums. I can still hear when he walked out the brush sound that he played at the start. I can still hear it in my head, thinking, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard.
Yes.
So I've had some good times, scary times too.
Yes, yes. And there you really get thrown in a deep end when with people like that they expect you to be.
You expect it, yes. I remember doing the first concert with Mark in Sydney Town Hall with Alan Turnbull playing the drums. And I wasn't a good reader, and I'm an average reader now. I'm a good reader, but I wasn't a good reader at all. And after the first session, we came off an interval, and Mark is a very serious man, and I know why. I discovered why. And I said to him, "I'm so sorry, Mark. I played that wrong chord in bar 13. And it won't happen again." Because we just started a 6-week tour, and he said, "It had better not." And scared the hell out of me. I was a nervous wreck for 6 weeks after. I can't afford to play another.
You better not. Yeah, that's a really threat. Yeah. Well, the people that you haven't played with, but I know musicians that you've admired, and people like Bill Evans and Keith Jarrett.
Still, Oscar Peterson,
Yes.
Errol Garner,
Yes.
all those guys that had their own sort of individualistic way of playing.
Yes.
Keith Jarrett is,
Yes.
I think, probably it's a
So what's
dangerous thing to say.
what's what's the thing specially about Keith Jarrett? Because you talk about that in your book
I
about play some Keith Jarrett at least, once or twice a week.
Well, I would first say that I still think he's one of the greatest musicians ever in the Western world. That's the first thing. He could play all the jazz standards, all the ones that I know, hundreds, literally hundreds, solo and trio. He could play most of the classical repertoire as well, and I've heard him do it, from Bach to Messiaen and Bartok.
Yes.
Is there anyone else in the world that is able to do that? And spend his life playing free improvisations in front of I don't know anybody else that's been able to do that in the history of music, I have to say.
Yes.
So he had a profound influence. In fact, I had such influence, I had to stop listening to him because I sounded like 10th rate Keith Jarrett,
Yes.
You're dangerous listening. That's
Yes, yes. Yeah, when you see somebody so good. So what was it about his music? It's I've watched a few clips recently, just to prepare for this, and it's just he sort of lives every note, doesn't he?
He does, yes. And one of the most intriguing thing about Jarrett is that although Western music is based on scales and patterns and things, which I don't go along with, but in his playing you rarely hear a scale or a pattern, and if you do, it's to get from one melodic note to the next. It's not to show off.
Yes.
He's got phenomenal technique in both hands, obviously.
Yes.
But there's something especially creative about him, and we'll never figure it out how you become so creative that every time I listen to him play, I think, damn, I wish I had done that.
Yes.
I wish I had been able to do that. And you can't, because there's some sort of, I align him as a strange analogy to Bach. And I have the same feeling when I listen to J.S. Bach. Damn, I wish I had been able to do that. Wish I had, and you can't, because there's something unique about both those people, especially for me. Every time I listen to Bach, I listen to Goldberg Variations this morning, and I think, oh God, they're timeless. And Jarrett's timeless too, I think.
Yes, yes. Well, I think it's certainly. Do you could never ever try to copy Bill Keith Jarrett, but you would do it on the basis of trying to put the same intensity. Is that what you're trying to do?
I mean, the people do copy. You naturally copy anyway if you listen.
Yes.
I've got a sort of a dislike of a lot of the American jazz education, because they teach you to learn every solo of everybody and then copy, and then learn all the licks, and I vehemently oppose that.
Yes.
If you're a creative artist, my theory is just listen, and enough of that player will rub off on you without actually blatantly copying.
Yes.
Because you can't help it when you if I listened to Bill a couple of nights ago,
yes,
and then with his trio, and I go to the piano next time, and I'm bound to do something that I just heard,
Yes.
So you've got to, in a sense, guard against that. Otherwise, you just become an imitator.
Yes.
I don't want to do that.
People who do that learn to play Tatum, for example, and
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sure.
They're floating about now.
Yeah. So, yes. Well, what's the main thing that nourishes your music?
I think it's being inspired by other players. For example, I for breakfast I have a piece of toast, and this morning I listened to Lang Lang playing the Goldberg Variations. So I always try to listen to, and I might listen to Keith the next day, or in the afternoon I might listen to and watch, because it's an important part of learning too. So it's about listening, I think.
Yes.
And the second thing is about playing with I always think the people that you love, it'll rub off too, you know.
Yeah.
Beginning with Leonard.
Yeah.
Years ago.
Have you still got that same enthusiasm in your senior years as you had? Yeah,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
terrific. And
Call it love.
love.
Music, yes.
Yep. Oh, that's good. So, talking about the music community, you know, generally here in Melbourne, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you do to improve the music community in Melbourne?
I think education in a more general sense than being formal education. For example, I've been thinking about it recently because I've just finished another book, believe it or not, and it's about, the title is Bloody Musicians, with a much loved
Yes.
text. And I was thinking about why don't people more people like jazz music, for example, which is a minority art form.
Yes.
So is classical music, incidentally. But I'm thinking, why don't more people like jazz? And my feeling is because if you babble on with anything, people are going to stop listening to you. So particularly, you might have to cut this bit, but particularly saxophone players, they pick the instrument up and they blast away for 400 choruses.
Yes.
Well, I get bored by it too.
Yes.
So it's a sort of general education, but also it's partly to do with the musicians too. Stop babbling on and be a composer when you play. You don't have to play 3,000 notes. Some
Yes.
people do, and
Yes.
that's impressive for about 5 minutes for me.
Yeah.
But I want to hear somebody play a composition, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
A spontaneous composition.
Yes.
Jared does that.
Yeah.
You know, whatever he plays, it sounds like it's got some shape, form.
Yes.
You've got to have. It's a bit like a painting, isn't it? You put a frame around it, don't you?
Yes.
You can't just random.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
And so the free improvisation, like Cecil Taylor's, that's interesting for me for a few minutes, but then I think that doesn't interest me anymore.
So, with the fact that there's so much music available now on Spotify, I mean, I look back and I think, say, to the time of the traditional jazz when, you know, there was trad bands in every pub and things going back to the late 50s, just before the Beatles arrived.
Yep.
And that was a little wave that came through, and then it's gone.
Yep.
And so we've gone back to, as you say, being the minority. Because when you look at, say, things like Moomba 73 and 74 and 75, they were jazz programs, weren't they?
They were. They were terrific jazz concerts in the Melbourne Town Hall. You remember that?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
No, Spotify is might sound a bit radical. They're responsible for a lot of bad things in music.
Yes. Well, my main criticism is that people don't realise how just awful the quality of the music is.
Exactly.
On, you know, it compared to an LP or a CD, it's terrible.
Well, we still make CDs when we make, but nobody's buying CDs anymore.
No, they're not.
And that's thanks to Spotify. I've actually written to them a couple of times.
Yeah, so you'll be destroyed.
Pay your musicians, you bastards. But they haven't responded.
That's right, exactly. You told us a bit about some of your best moments with other musicians, but can we call any worse moments?
I think the fear of the Mark Murphys and that was probably my worst moment. It was 6 weeks to go, and he's saying it better not. You better not make another mistake. I haven't had too many bad. I've had a couple of scary times with Melbourne Symphony and the State Orchestra, because I didn't do that a lot. So when you've got your piano on the left-hand side, the conductor's conducting 80 pieces, and they're not looking at you, hoping that you know what you're doing. I needed that guidance, because if you don't play with an orchestra a lot,
yes,
when they conduct the downbeat, nobody plays. It's later than that. So you know, jazz musicians will always play on the downbeat, but they don't do that in the orchestra. So I've had a few scary moments about that inexperience, you know, and and being put under the immense pressure of being a solo piano player in an orchestra, I can't possibly describe the fear
How do you prepare yourself for that?
There are pills.
That's just amazing, isn't it? Well, now tell us about when you started this interest in composing your own works. What was it?
I just think I was invited to write a few pieces. I remember the first orchestral piece I wrote was with John Sangster, believe it or not, conducting, believe it or not, an chamber orchestra in Sydney. I think it was I think Move Records go back that far.
Yes.
And I've had a long association with. I think I certainly wouldn't have suggested it, but somebody said, "Why don't you write a 4-movement quartet for piano, double bass, and chamber orchestra?" So I did.
Yep.
So that's always been my life. I've never actually. I only write music when somebody asks me, and that's always been the case.
Yes. Yes. So. Yes, I was just trying to think about that particular one that you did play with Sangster. I wrote it. I made a note of it here somewhere.
I can't even remember what it's called.
Well, you did quite a lot with Sangster anyway.
Enormous. Major influence, I must say. I forgot to mention him.
Yeah. Tell us about Sangster, because he was a man who lived his life with running with the choke out, didn't he?
And the accelerator on it. He was a genuine eccentric, I have to say that. Very, very strange man. I don't know whether you know the dark side of his past, but perhaps I won't mention that here. But there was an extremely dark side when he was a child with his parents. Very distressed, very, very bad. I think that was the start of his eccentricity. Yeah. But the great thing about John, I did a lot of recording with John and a lot of live playing.
Yes.
The beautiful thing about John, and I wish it had happened everywhere, is that he engaged the musicians that, one, he loved from a personal point of view, and the ones that he knew would play his music the way he thought it should go.
Yes.
Len was involved, but
yes.
and I remember bassoons and oboes and bagpipes and the whole thing. But that's a rare thing. So when you got in the studio with John with a 10-piece orchestra, and you look on your music, you'd think always you'd think, I'd look at it and I'd say, I can play that, and he'd written it for the way I played. And you think, isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
And every time that happened, but he did some very, very strange things, I have to say. And you probably know that he was in the Don Burrows Quartet for a while.
Yeah. Yep.
And he used to drive Don completely insane by doing live television shows. And just before they went on, he put his coat on back to front, all that sort of thing. Where Burrows couldn't do anything about it because the light went on. There are 100 of wonderful stories like that. So I have to say, he was a major influence on me, not just musical, and not just good either. Because if you asked him in the studio, "Is this right, John? Is this what you?" He'd say, "Whatever you want to do, love. You just play the piano. It's okay." He'd never say, "No, don't do that." He hired the people that he knew.
He knew
if
that
he made a mistake, it didn't bother him in the absolutely slightest.
Yeah.
He'd chuckle in the.
Well, I think so. He's the sort of person that'd say, if you weren't making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough.
That's right.
Now, Tony, I want to just ask you a little bit about your long time partnership with Bob Settergreen playing duo pianos.
Well, the first thing I'd say about that is they're in great fun.
Yes.
And we argue all the time about who's the greatest musician, and he mentions Jimi Hendrix and all that stuff, and I just think it's ridiculous. For somehow we're like chalk and cheese, the piano playing. If I've got nothing to do with what Bob does, and he's got nothing to do with what I do. And yet, when we come together, I suppose it's to do with that sort of friendship. It seems to work.
Yes.
It's probably a kind of a no fear atmosphere.
Yes.
He does what he does, and I do what he.
Yes.
And somehow we argue about what we're going to play until the last minute, and then away we go. And for some reason,
yes. Well, I remember seeing one of your concerts years back, and there was also an element of I can do it better than him.
That's Bob doing that, not me. He likes to show off. Bob.
Yes, that's right.
He's one of the great blues players. I don't play the blues for reasons I won't go into, but he's one of the great jazz blues piano players in the world, I think.
He's many things with blues, especially. Well, we did an interview with Bob about it, and he talks. His background is very similar to you. He starts off playing on one of the conventions up in Sydney on a piano, and all he knew was "You Are My Sunshine," and he played that for about an hour.
That'll be right, yeah.
Yes. So
he's a wonderful friend and wonderful.
Yeah, so
he's a wonderful pianist.
It's really good. Then the other ones that you sort of mainly influenced with were people like when you started playing with Rob Burke.
Yep.
And Graham Lyle. They're two that
right.
Come to mind. So talk us a little bit about that.
Graham in particular has had a profound influence on me. I think he's had a profound influence on saxophone playing in Australia, to be honest. He kind of used to teach by what I call osmosis. He hardly ever said anything. I watched him teach, and I thought, when I first saw him teach, I thought, God, you're a lousy teacher, you can't teach anything. But he was one of those people, completely unlike the Americans, completely opposite to the Americans, who never stopped talking. And you probably know Lyndon Johnson's wonderful saying is that you don't learn anything when you're talking. I love that. And so Graham, we did a lot of playing together. I suppose it's a personal taste thing, but Graham played the saxophone in the sound that I loved. So
yes.
It's selfish in many ways. It's not loud, but it's phenomenally beautiful to my ear, and he can play loud, believe me. Yeah. But he doesn't. He's got a phenomenal technique, but he doesn't use it. He plays music, like the compositional thing all the time. So he had a major influence, and I think when he was teaching at Whopper in Perth, he had big influence. I still play with the younger players that still talk about Lyle as being a great teacher. I hardly heard him say a word when he was teaching. He'd just say, "Be careful of that," or "What's that C sharp?" And then just walk around the room and get on with it, But he had some kind of special thing that where you don't talk, just listen, and I love that.
Yes, well, that's the mantra that I keep hearing from you and all your musical experiences, is that you got to listen.
I think it's really all about that,
yes.
And some people, I believe that theory follows practice, it doesn't lead it, if you know what I mean. You learn as you play, and you learn how to do it, but you don't fill your head with theoretical issues about scales and arpeggios. Just play and then learn about it as you go. Not everybody agrees with that.
Yep. You've done some really quite interesting things as well, because there's, I noticed just looking at it, things like the one that you did, the Tony Gould Quartet. You actually put a name to your quartet.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, it was Graham Lyle and Emma Gilmartin was the singer.
Oh, she's a beautiful singer.
Yeah.
I still play with her.
Yes, so it's good.
Wonderful singer.
And then I came across Peter Petrucci.
Yes. We made some lovely guitar, piano recordings.
Yes. So how did you come to meet him?
He was a student at the VCA. Most of the people that I've played with over the years, apart from my age, were students at the VCA. When the VCA was, I thought, a very special place, untouched by university. Now it's been taken over by the university.
Yeah.
So you can't have as much fun.
Fun.
And fun's a really important part of learning music.
Yes.
I don't just mean jazz either. I mean classical music.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
Bernstein's term, the joy of music, is sometimes forgotten.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit about the jazz scene in Melbourne as you see it. Is that people at places like Bennett's Lane and
Bennett's Lane's been wonderful, and now it's called Jazz Lab, as you know, and that's still very popular. It goes 7 days a week.
Yeah.
There's the one that's run by that wonderful man called his name escapes me. It's up the top of William Street somewhere. What's it called? It costs a fortune. Bird's Basement.
Yeah, Bird's Basement.
That's going. That's sort of for high.
Yes.
5-star stuff.
Yes.
$70 for something to eat.
Yes.
But it's good. It's good. Joe Kindamo plays there fairly regularly.
Yes.
There's Paris Cat in the city, in Gould Place, I think it's called. There's Uptown.
Yep.
That's in Brunswick. There's now the Lido in Hawthorne.
Yep.
And there's the what's it called? South Side.
Yes, down at the Elstonwick Theatre.
Yeah.
Well, why is it, do you think, that these places have survived in Melbourne, where if you go to Sydney now, for example, it's a complete desert?
Not much there, is there? Just
virtually nothing.
Wisnowski with that's the Seymour Centre or something, but there's nothing there, no. But we've always been, Melbourne's always been a creative centre for most things in Australia, and not necessarily the greatest, but with the hub.
Yes.
You don't get that many jazz clubs. You've never had that many jazz clubs in Sydney.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Not in Adelaide and not in Perth. There's Arlington's in Perth, but Melbourne's always been that. It's worth a PhD, you know.
Yes.
Why is it?
Yes.
Why is it?
Do you think it's something to do with the weather and that?
I think the weather's got everything to do with everything, in my opinion. Weather changes your life and your lifestyle and everything.
Because maybe people in Sydney are too busy out on surfboards and do all that.
I think you're probably right. Climate's got a huge part in how people behave. I think I've always said that.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
Believe that.
It's good. Well, I can remember, you know, in the days when you would, when the days of the Yarra Yarra band, and that was, which is when I started following jazz. And I always remember the Glen Iris RSLs, the nom de plume for the band, the adventure was Dante's Inferno. And if there's ever a less a Dante's Inferno than the Glen Iris RSL, it was.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, there weren't too many RSL clubs as they were in Sydney, as I'm sure you know. That was a whole culture of where all the jazz guys used to play in those hilarious RSL pubs, clubs in Sydney, and do all the floor shows and stuff. We had a bit of that down here, but nothing like Sydney.
Tony, tell us a little bit about your academic career, because it's been an interesting journey.
Okay. It goes back to that opera singer I was telling you about, and not being able to read music and getting depressed about it at the old Hampton Hotel when we did all floor shows. I could play most of them by ear, but the opera singer did me in. So I went away and thought, seriously, I'd better find out where Middle C was. I didn't know where it was. So I did a night course in what was then called, I think, matriculation.
Yep.
And I managed to get, and had some classical lessons with an old Russian teacher. God love him. He died now. His name was Isidore Blankleder. And he must have, and at the first piece he gave me, and I never played any jazz, classical music before, he gave me the Beethoven Piano Concerto to start with. So that set me back, Anyway, he must have, and some Bach and Chopin, he must have seen something, because I was the first student, I was mature age by then, about, I can't remember, 22 or 23. He must have seen something, because he put me through the HSC, the matriculation, and I managed to get into the conservatorium. That's when I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, and became a little snob and started speaking with an English accent for a while, in amongst all the posh blokes at the thing. And there was no jazz there, and it was frowned upon.
Yes.
And I still played a little bit in the background. But I sort of started playing Beethoven and Bach, and I loved it. And I did a 4-year degree there. I think it was 4 years. And then I must have got the taste for that. And then I went to Monash and did a Master of Arts.
Yes.
With something, 9 subjects or something, include paleography and musicology and historiography and God knows what. I loved it because I did an Indonesian music. And then I really got the taste then. And this is after I was a senior tutor at the Con. As soon as I finished my classical degree, they asked me to be a tutor. So, of course. So I went to Monash and did a Master of Arts. And then I thought I must have still had the taste, because then I went to La Trobe and did a PhD.
You did a master's there, did you?
I did a master's at Monash and a PhD at La Trobe. So I just got the taste for, and I came from a very lower working class family, remember. And mum and dad were great, but there was no education anywhere in sight. And dad was a truckie. And he was a great tradie too. But I didn't have any education when I was a kid. So I must have got the taste by actually achieving something to get into the university, to Con. And then I just
carried on from there.
I carried on, and I loved every minute of it, to be honest. You know.
Well, tell us about your time at the Victorian College of the Arts when you were there.
I left the conservatorium to go to the VCA, thanks to Brian Brown, I have to say, who was the head of the jazz department then, jazz department then we started to call it improv department. And he gave me a job as a lecturer there in jazz music. And to cut a long story short, I was there for a few years, then I became head of the jazz department, and then the head of the postgraduate department, and then eventually the dean. What they were doing hiring a jazz musician is beyond me. Anyway, and that was a particularly, I think, and people still talk about it, I think, it was a particularly incredibly beautiful place to study. It was full of joy, happiness and laughing, and before the university took hold of it. And there was the start of a mingling between classical and jazz musicians.
Yes.
Jazz musicians were all the funny ones, the classical were very serious. But it started to get that mesh of beautiful sort of camaraderie, just the start of it. And so I was there for something like 20 years, I think. And then at the end of my first term as dean, I think it was about 3 or 4 years. And I'm sure everybody knows when you get a feeling that it's time. So I thought it's time to stop. In retrospect, maybe I should have stayed another 4 or 5 years, but I didn't. And then they offered me this job at Monash. So I went out of the frying pan into
another frying pan. Well, what was the background to the College of the Arts being taken over by Melbourne Uni? Was it financial?
I own most of all the property at the in St Kilda Road, as you know, and most of it in Sturt Street now. Yeah. It was just a power thing, that's all. They wanted to be involved, and as you know, there was a conservatorium at Melbourne. Yes. And that wasn't enough for them. They wanted to take the Victorian College of the Arts, and we actually fought pretty hard. I've never been in a protest except that one down the middle of St Kilda Road. Because once you get involved in university, universities are wonderful things, but not for music, in my humble opinion. Yes. But that's another story. The universities put restrictions on art, and particularly music, that put it into a sort of cage, and music doesn't belong in a cage. It belongs to be free, and it needs to be creative, and it needs to be a priority. Now when you're in universities, everything's by the book, You have to pass people where you don't think you should.
Yep.
Universities are guilty of that. There's no doubt about it. Apart from the fact that the Melbourne University forgot to pay their staff properly over the last 5 or 10 years.
Oh, that was just a administrative
still
oversight.
paying back, yes. And Monash Universities gave the Vice-Chancellor, the last Vice-Chancellor, a dinner party when there's still sacking staff out there, when they were still sacking, this is not so long ago. And the bill for the dinner party to say farewell to the Vice-Chancellor, who is now the Governor of Victoria, was $127,000 for a dinner. When the staff, sessional staff, are being hardly being paid. That's political, but I don't care if you want to.
Yeah, no. This is it. Nobody's going to watch this video anyway.
Oh, all right, good.
So that's really good. So your time at Monash, did you spend a bit of time sort of pushing against the bureaucracy?
I tried to instill a bit of joy in the place. But that's university, remember, and the restrictions are too severe. In my humble opinion, music doesn't belong in university, not in university in this country at least. The best schools of music are the National Academy of Music, which is coming back to South Melbourne soon,
yes.
Where there are there's music, and that's what you do.
Yes.
You don't have to do anything else except be the best you can be. I love that. Universities don't understand. Basically, and without raving on too long, universities, in my opinion, do not understand music, and they don't understand musicians. That's basically, and how it works. I don't think they do.
Yeah.
They're great at other things, medicine, and I love university. Don't misunderstand me, but music doesn't. Never fitted at the Melbourne University years ago. I know most of the professors didn't like music being at the Melbourne University. One of the reasons being that there were one-to-one lessons. Nowhere else in university you get that. And the other deans of faculties hated that they were subsidising music.
Yeah, yeah.
Strange.
Fascinating. Now, here's your book, which I we'll get another copy of. It's called A Ramble on Humour and Music, with occasional diatribes towards the cloth-eared. Yeah. Now, tell us about the cloth-eared.
The cloth-eared are politicians. Can you think of anybody seriously interested in music in federal politics at the moment? I can't think of one. But remember Keating, at least he liked Marla.
Yes.
Barry Jones, who's still going, and I attended a function with him a couple of nights ago. He was interested in the arts. Apart from that, they are cloth-eared. Cloth-eared means they can't hear anything. Yeah. And they don't listen to you when you're talking. That's not a whinge incident. Yes. It's just that I've found. And the cloth-eared are the other cloth-eared are the hierarchy in universities, the human resources departments. Or inhuman. No, I call them the human remains. And they don't understand music either. They try and squeeze it into the hierarchy. Yes. And music doesn't work that way.
It can't be squeezed in. So what was the motivation for you to write that? Because it's full of wonderful anecdotes.
All those things we've just been talking about. There's got to be a joy in music. Yes. There's not enough. And in classical music, and when I studied classical music, that was another world when I was living in the classical music world. And there wasn't too many smiles around there either. Though I had a lecturer who kept us all going by drinking too much and being crazy. But in that world, there's a word that's attached to it, which I think is a shame. Serious. It's serious music. Do you play any? Oscar Peterson was asked that once in Adelaide. Yes. Do you play any serious music? He said, yes, and this interview's just ended. But people think that you have to be serious about the joy of the great music. And I don't think the music is serious, but you don't have to walk around with a bloody long face all day because you're playing Beethoven. Because, you know, it just doesn't seem right to me. It's serious, and when you play it, it's profound, and, you know, there's nothing more profound for me than the last 15 minutes of the Mahler Symphony, Second Symphony. But you don't have to spend your life looking down and sad.
No.
Because that doesn't make sense to me. For music's supposed to be a joyful...
Yes, absolutely good. But we've just recently lost a dear friend who was in his late 90s, and he used to turn up at jazz down in South Melbourne that the Rockets played every Wednesday night. And he said, just a couple of weeks before he died, that my musical injection on Wednesday night is better than all the music, all the medicines.
Of course.
Yeah,
that's exactly
it's
true.
exactly good. So this is a wonderful read, and it's full of humour, and I just congratulate you for what you've done with it, because it's absolutely really fantastic. Now, do you reckon we've covered most of the...
I think, I'm happy to... Whatever you want to talk about.
It's good. One thing, perhaps just to finish up on about it, is to say, is creative or jazz music got a future here in Australia?
It always will be, but it will always be a minority art form, and for those reasons I mentioned before, you know, don't babble on when you play music, play some music. But also, we're living in a pop culture, and we've got no hope of. And I actually, bizarre as it might sound, I like being in a minority. I don't want to be in the commercial music world. I don't want it.
Yes.
I think, you know, is there anything better than going to a concert and sitting very close to somebody, you can hear them breathe and play acoustic music?
Yes.
Call me old-fashioned, but
yes.
I still like acoustic music.
Yes.
And I think ultimately people still do too.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't have to be amplified at all.
Of course not.
I can think of people like Don Heap, you know, played bass, and he was a strident. You know, you put an amplifier near him and he just, he wouldn't do it.
It's a different sound altogether.
Yes, no, it's really good. Well, Tony, we're going to finish up now with it, and so what I want to do is thank you for it, because it's a wonderful little snapshot of a very interesting life in music. Have you got any sort of, you know, here you are in your golden years, like me, and have you got any plans for the future?
I'm still playing and making a recording with David Jones and Ben Robinson at the ABC next week.
Yep.
So I hope I'll still play. I don't have many regrets in life, but one of them is I wish I could play the piano better. And I mean that in all sincerity, because then I suddenly realised, why can't I play the piano better? I know why, I suddenly realised. Because I've been 50 years in academia, and when I should have been bloody well practising. That's the reason. It's not an excuse, but I think it's
a reason.
So I can still play, but I wish I played better. But you can't have everything.
It's good. Well, thank you very much for Tony. It's been a real pleasure to do it. And when we finish here now, I'm going to ask you if you would just move over to this lovely piano here and just give us a little sample of improvisation. Okay. So thanks very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Lovely. Lovely.
Beautiful.